I come from South Africa and I come from a middle class background. And in 1976, when Hector Peterson was killed in Soweto, and there was a Soweto uprising, you know, I was 10 years old. And living in the suburbs, I was really just interested, growing up in boyfriends and, you know, the squabbles you used to have with your friends. And there used to be a yellow van that used to go around, and that was a van looking for black people who didn't have the correct passbook. So I knew that something was wrong, but I was very young and naive. And I think that, in a way, photography became the vehicle for me to cross over to the other side, to discover my country. And that's very much what it was. I was very blessed in 1993 under the late Ken Oosterbroek. He gave me my first break in photography, and I covered the historical moment in 1994 of the first democratic elections in South Africa. And from being this green-eyed young woman, suddenly, you know, within the first year of me working there, I lost Ken. You know, we lost Kevin Carter, we lost Abdul Sharif, Gary Bernard committed suicide. I mean, it was jubilation coming up to the elections, but at the same time, we were witnessing a hell of a lot of death. And I suppose the influence of my work comes from that darkness, but at the same time, South Africa was moving into a period of lightness. Between Dogs and Wolves, growing up with South Africa, it was very spontaneous. It's looking at the youth living on the fringe of South African society. But Stanley Green gave me the title of the work, which is Entre Chien et Loup, which is the twilight. You don't know if a dog is a wolf or a wolf is a dog. And I mean, that's very much how South Africa is. It's not just all, I'm not speaking in race, but it's not just black and white. There's a lot of things in between. And it looks at, I suppose, the loss of innocence. I think it looks at struggle. I think it looks at darkness. I think it looks at, I mean, the one thing I think most photographers will be able to say to you is that when people experience the most critical kind of situations in poverty or abuse or whatever, and you still see a young child singing and smiling and playing in such atrocity, and you know, I think that's the lightness within the book. I mean, the thing is, I think as photographers, it really is in many ways, I mean, you know, about the people you meet. I remember Rosie in the Fast Guns, you know, when he's swinging his gun around and I'm like looking at it, it's like, Rosie, like, please put it away. Or, you know, I got the title from Cutie, he says, "You the Lone Ranger," you know, and being a white girl, and also the gangster saying to me, "So where's your bulletproof jacket?" And yeah, I mean, the between darkness and light also comes up when I went with a so-called social worker. You know, I asked him if we could go to the train station, because he said he helped, you know, women to find homes coming from rural areas, and he helped the street children. So I asked him if I could join him, you know, to go photograph the street children, and the children stole his wallet, and he did nothing about it. I would have been furious, and I put him in my car afterwards, and I dropped him at the garage where he was sleeping, and I said, "You're such a giving, wonderful human being." I would have really been angry with the children. And the next 3 days later, front page of the Star newspaper, there it was, a mugshot of the very same man, Moses Satoli. He was actually a serial killer. He had killed 48 women. So you never quite know. I mean, I think that's what's taught me a lot about life, that nothing is what it seems. I mean, in all the things that I covered, where was I attacked? I was attacked outside a restaurant. So I think you can't assume things, you know, in life. And I think there is always that grey area. Well, when I wanted to do the project Neighbours, and I mean, it was so broad, you could do anything, but in Westbury, which is where the fast guns lived, basically neighbours rely on each other for survival. So what I did was I contacted the Star newspaper. There was a writer who used to write about the fast guns and the Varados, the crime, the gang warfare that was going on. And I said, could he introduce me? And he said, possibly. He said, there's a soccer dance, a football dance in Westbury on Friday night. And my car broke down. And I went, and, you know, in those days I had torn jeans and, you know, didn't look very glamorous. And I went there, and the one gangster, and the taxi took me because I didn't have a car. He said, you sure you want to get out here? I don't think you should. I said, yes, this is where I want to be. And I met the fast guns guy, and he looked me up and down. He said, you can't come in like this. And he took me to his sister's house and gave me a dress to wear. And they really tested me at that dance. And then they said, okay, you can come next week. We have this shop, which wasn't really a shop. It had a snooker table, a pool table, and they used to deal with drugs and stolen goods from there. And for a week or so, I just interviewed everyone because I wanted to formalize how I'm going to tell my story. I needed to know their story. I really realized that gangsterism is something that's happened since the 60s, and it's a cycle that repeats itself. All that changes are the drugs, the names of the gangs, and the members in the gangs. And that because of the structure of the home, you know, children move onto the street at a very young age, and for protection they join the gangs. So I knew I needed to get into a house to show how a typical family would be living. And there I met Lynette with her 3 children. Her husband was in jail for murder, and so I spent time with them. And then I spent time with the fast guns and the Jonathan D boys that were the teenage gangsters. And I think, like, people said, well, how did you manage to work there? Because not many people are given access to work there. And I think it's just about creating some form of honesty. You know, I told them what I was doing, who it was for, how it would go out there. When you walk into projects that are really, really difficult, I think, you know, at the end of the day, when you see it on the wall or you see it in the book, you don't realize that every photographer is going through, like, you're dealing with people. So, you know, you're dealing with whatever their background is or whatever their situation is, or an organization. And I think that's part of it, you know, how do you gain that access or that trust to get in there and do what you have to do. But I believe in honesty. I believe, you know, if you're just yourself, say what you really mean, I think people are pretty smart, you know, and they can sense the good from the bad, but not always. Between Dogs and Wolves was really that, as I said, the exploration around struggle, and it's looking at the youth on the fringe of society, and it really is about, I don't know, hope. I mean, it's also about strength. It's about people having the resilience to keep going and continuing. And it's also a 10-year process in South Africa where, you know, things were shifting and changing. They always are. It still is. My project Going Home, Illegality and Repatriation, it was done at a time where Pro Helvetia commissioned 10 photographers from all over the world to choose a project around borders. And I wanted to do a project that sort of followed the progression from Hillbrow, which is an inner city suburb, where a lot of immigrants are living, where a lot of drug dealers are living. It's hustle and bustle. And at that time, it was in 2000, where the huge Mozambican floods were happening. And at the same time, there was Operation Crackdown. And this was a police operation that was going into the buildings in Hillbrow, looking for stolen goods, illegal immigrants, prostitutes. It was a very big operation, and for me, I thought that's where I start off. And you know, I think one of the most difficult things around this project, well, there were many difficult things, but was to gain the access. And once I gained the access, I went into Hillbrow, I photographed there. I then went to Lindela, which is the repatriation center. And I decided, because what happened in Mozambique with the floods, I would follow the Mozambicans home. And there was a train from Lindela that went, it was like a milk train. It stopped at every station. And I decided to get on the train, obviously getting permission again, and follow the immigrants home. 50% of the train did pay a bribe and jumped off as the train started going, and the other 50% went home, either because they needed to get home or because they were too scared to pay the bribe and jump off the train. And what I did was I put my money in my shoe and I jumped off the train in Mozambique and I followed someone home. And it was very interesting because for me, you know, even though the work was shot in 2000, it was about 2 years ago, there were massive xenophobia attacks in South Africa. And an organization, the Treat Action Campaign, asked if they could use my photographs, but that was before the xenophobic attacks. So I don't know how they felt that something was going to happen. And I was told by a member of the community that the immigrants who were camping out in the church actually used the magazine with my photographs from 2000 to describe how it felt for them living in South Africa. So the work, it hasn't died, it keeps, you know, it has a life. For me, that, you know, covering so many years of domestic violence, gangsterism, poverty, you know, political violence, you witnessing something that not the majority of people are witnessing, and when you arrive home, you know, you just have to get on with your life, and how many people can relate to what you have experienced, and it has to impact on you. I think photographers don't speak enough about suffering from post-traumatic stress, that the things that you're seeing and you're witnessing have to psychologically affect you. And I've been covering, as I said to you, like quite dark things. I had lost my colleagues. I mean, you know, it's, and this, yes, of course the story is very important, and that's what we focus on. But at the same time, psychologically, it has to have an impact on you. And I think, you know, the cherry on the top was when I was attacked and in South Africa, and I just needed to get out, just for a breath of fresh air. And being away in Europe for me was like being in paradise. You know, that you weren't in your neighborhood and walking out the door, and the politics of Paris and London, because I lived in both countries, were not my politics. But I would get on a plane and go and photograph in Iraq, in Pakistan, back in South Africa many, many times. But when I went back to Paris and London, I could sit at the cafe and, you know, just chill. So it was very good to have that breathing space for that moment in my photographic life. Amnesty International and MSF were doing another broad project on violence against women, and they asked if I would do something in South Africa. And domestic violence is very prominent within South Africa, and so I thought it was very important to cover, this issue. And that was a really difficult project, firstly to gain the access. I knew that I didn't want to photograph in the way of the day in the life situation, and many women I wanted to try and find women who were living in the shelters, but you have to try and break through the NGOs or the organizations to give you access. But how do you photograph domestic violence? Donna Ferreira did an incredible thing. I mean, she, I think, was violated herself. But as I said, I didn't want to, in a way, follow a woman from A to Z. So I created a portrait. It's a triptych. The middle image is the portrait of the woman. And when you speak to someone who's been abused, generally there's something very significant in their abuse, in their history. Be it how my partner stabbed me in the back. Be it that my daughter lost her eyesight because she was punched in the face by her husband. Be it that I was so beautiful before the neighbor bit off my nose, because of jealousies around husbands and that. And so the first photograph is very much about the relevance and the symbolic reference to what was very difficult for each woman in their abuse. And sometimes it's symbolic. I mean, the one photograph has a knife, and this was another thing in the photojournalistic world, it's not the real knife, but it symbolizes what was so relevant to this woman. And so I don't have issue around things like that. And the third photograph is what she has in her life now. For example, the one woman I photographed, most of them were staying in a hostel, and all they had was their underwear, their clothing, and a few cosmetics. So the third photograph is relevant to their present moment right now. Well, it's one is the portrait of who you are, and the last image is the present. It's very much just about here I am now. I mean, for one woman, it was like for her the church, that her trust in God and whatever, that was important. So all these layers, they consciously, as a photographer, I'm creating layers to tell you more in the story. And that's why I'm doing it. So, one woman said for her, it's just her child that she absolutely, to get out of there, it was for her child. So I photographed a photograph of her and her child. So it's just adding a layer to what this woman's story is all about. And that's why I did it in that way. For everyone, if you have something that's difficult in your life, to talk about it is very important. But I think that the woman that I photographed, for them it was also very important to speak out, to make it public about what happened to them. And I suppose in a way it's to give each person their power, and not hide away from what's happened to them. And I think it's also to say to other women out there that this is happening. And, you're not the only person that it's happening to, and it's okay to leave your husband. My friend and writer Axel Gilden was in South Africa from France, and he said to me while we were sitting in the park, I'm looking for a contemporary photographic book on Soweto, how you've shown me Soweto, but I can't find it. And he said, the World Cup is coming along, you probably could get funding and you should do something. I mean, Soweto is historically very significant and important, and changes have happened. And because you live there, you just take it for granted that Soweto's there. And also, there's been works on Soweto, but so anyway, I did find the funding from the Goethe Institute to really support the arts in South Africa, and Jacana Media, who are my publisher, were on board. I think there were a number of things that influenced me. The first one is that there is some form of activism around that book, and it's very much about breaking stereotypes. And I think that sometimes for me, the media creates a specific framework around a specific country. And before the World Cup, the international media couldn't have done more stories around crime, violence, HIV/AIDS, and how the World Cup would never work. Okay? Then I went to Maponya Mall, which is a mall in Soweto that is quite upmarket. And you see people with their shopping trolleys just tick, 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 walking around, normally boring. And I stood there and I thought to myself, how often do we get to see that boring image of Africa? We never. We always see the most dramatic things. We don't see the normality and just the boring things. And that was another influence for me. And then it was going to a radio station, Josie FM, Soweto FM, or Josie FM in Soweto. And this woman saying to me, we don't have to leave Soweto. Everything is here. It's like Hollywood to me. And that was, all those things influenced how I was going to create the book Soweto. And that's what I did. I drove 7,000 kilometers in a 3-month period. And I just, in a way, looked at the normality, how 3 million people experience Soweto. I didn't want to show, and I'm not saying that there isn't the reality of the dusty and the crime and the HIV/AIDS and the poverty, but there's also something else there, which is spring cleaning, which is little cute twins, which is a rock band. Through my photography, I try and show you what I hope to do, maybe the compassion. And yeah, I try and bring the person out so that maybe when you view something, you would open your mind and maybe the fear will dissipate slightly. And that's what I try, I hope for. But it's not, when you're creating, you're just creating. You're going with the process. And then it's just how it translates in the magazine or on the wall or wherever it's shown. But I do think that I hope to just break through a few barriers. When I describe the photography, I never think of the photograph. I think of the experience and I think of the people that I meet. And that's what it's really about. Because as a photographer, it's not only the story that you're doing, that is part of it, but I think that what we choose to photograph and how we aim our camera or how we choose to edit, it's a learning process about yourself personally as well. I definitely found what I'm passionate about. When I left media planning, I remember, it's like things in life test you. I was offered, another ad agency wanted to poach me for a lot of money. And then I was offered at the start 3 months with no guarantee, with hardly any money. And I said, goodbye advertising, and I just went for it. And I never turned back.